Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, January 13th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to talk about that game that happened on Friday. Ohio State wins the Cotton Bowl in very dramatic fashion. Jack Sawyer gets his moment in the sun, and we'll talk about it all in the first segment. Then we'll get into a little talk around where Texas goes from here. Obviously, the Arch Manning era has started over there in Austin, but still a lot of questions that you have to answer as you go into 2025. Then we'll take a little bit of an early look at that national title game. Ohio State, Notre Dame, going to be a really fun matchup between two teams that have dealt with a lot this year. A couple of losses that they did not expect to take, and they were able to battle through them. Then we'll get into a couple of overreactions from this past weekend, a couple that I'm all the way on board with, a couple that I'm not necessarily all the way on board with, but definitely are things to think about as we head into the championship and really into the offseason. And then we'll do a little bit of a weekend update. We'll get into all of the different things happening around the sport. Miami gets a quarterback and a defensive coordinator, and we'll talk about both of them at the end of the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that and we can have a little fun back and forth here. But let's go ahead and get into this, and let's talk about first that Cotton Bowl that did happen on Friday. Obviously, we had the show Friday, got ready for that game, and I had said I had a feeling that there was going to be an incredible game. I had a feeling that it was going to absolutely deliver, and it very much did. It very much did. It was 2 minutes left. Texas was on the goal line with about down 7 with about 2 minutes left, and then the play that happened that everyone around Columbus will remember forever. Jack Sawyer gets a fumble, for 83 yards and a touchdown, and Ohio State gets the win, moves on to the national title, and there's a lot of different things to kind of unpack here. Obviously, this game opened up, and it looked like it might have been all Ohio State. Texas gets a turnover on downs on their first offensive possession. Then Ohio State comes down on the 10-play drive, scores a touchdown. You're thinking, okay, maybe they might be able to control this game, kind of handle it. Then the Texas defense really set their feet, got 8 straight punts by both teams, and then Texas was able to break through with a big-time score to Jaden Blue with that first touchdown. They obviously got 2 touchdowns to Jaden Blue on essentially the same play call. Great play call both times by Steve Sarkisian, but great kind of getting them back in the game. Felt like they were on their road to possibly getting back in this game, tying it going into halftime, really in a good position. And then TreVeyon Henderson takes one to the house, 75 yards on a screen. It was definitely one of those that I think Pete Kwiatkowski definitely wants that play back. It's one of those that blitzed about 5 guys on that play, missed TreVeyon Henderson, and he went to the house. One of those guys that can totally change the game, and he definitely did on that play. But Texas was able to kind of open the second half with a pair of punts and then scored a long touchdown drive, tied it up at 14. And then things got a little bit wild. Ohio State went on a 13-play, 88-yard, 7-minute, 45-second touchdown drive, had multiple third-down conversions from Will Howard, had a fourth-down conversion from Will Howard that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but remarkable drive for them. Texas marches down the field, and then they have the goal line stand that a lot of people remember forever. But this defensive line really did eat Quinn Ewers up for a lot of the day. And some of it was Quinn Ewers putting himself in bad spots. You know, pocket management, pocket presence has been a big-time issue for Quinn Ewers really throughout his career. It was a big-time issue on Friday, no doubt about that. And the offensive line didn't necessarily help him out too much. Ohio State had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 58 rushing yards allowed. And if you want to take out Quinn Ewers' sack yards just for fun, 76 yards on 24 carries is not exactly a good day at the office for your run game. So it was the issues that had plagued Texas really all season. It was the power run game. It was the ability to score when you get into the red area, and it was some of the pocket presence issues that Quinn Ewers has had throughout his career that definitely reared its ugly head in this game. But really, it's this moment, right? Everyone in Ohio State is going to remember this moment. Jack Sawyer is definitely going to remember this moment for a very long time. He makes the play that a lot of people will be talking about for a very long time around Columbus, and now they move on. And the question is, will this play be the moment, or will it be one of the moments? Because the reality is, everyone has one of these moments on a national championship run. You know, everyone has that one big-time catch, that one big-time block, that one big-time whatever that puts you in the national title, that puts you in a position to possibly win a national title. you still got to finish the job, obviously, and that definitely something to think about. But I did want to talk about the second and goal call that a lot of people are going around talking about with Steve Sarkisian. The toss to Trey Wisner that definitely got eaten up in a lot of different ways by Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, but I do understand it. It's definitely not necessarily the greatest of calls, definitely something that I probably would have just run up the middle a couple of different times to see what you get on the first couple of first couple of downs, and then kind of find yourself on third down. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where if it works and Kelvin Banks hits his block against Lathan Ransom, Trey Wisner might walk into the end zone, and then you have a totally different conversation. So it's definitely a missed moment. There's no doubt about that, and definitely one that Steve Sarkisian will be thinking about for quite some time. But I don't know. It's one of those calls that I think a lot of people will tear to pieces, and it's one that if it works, we're probably not thinking about it too much. And as for why Arch didn't come in there, because I think that's another conversation going around. From my point of view, I haven't heard this said, so it's not necessarily, totally accurate or totally 100%, but it did not look like Arch Manning was 100% after that first run that he took. Looked like he took a little bit of a hit to the head. Definitely was something that he wasn't holding his helmet on the sideline for the majority of the back half of that game. I don't think he was eligible to come in that moment, much less was he going to in a goal line type situation. So I think that's the answer there. Definitely something that Sark is going to be asked about, and definitely something that hopefully he'll definitely change a little bit going forward. But overall, remarkable game from this Ohio State defense. They were all over the place. Remarkable game from the Texas defense in a lot of different ways. But Ohio State made what I like to call the championship plays in a lot of they made there were two kind of huge moments in this game as far as I'm concerned, and there were two moments where Ohio State just kind of won the day. It was obviously the TreVeyon Henderson play, and then the third down play that really, the fourth down play that obviously Jack Sawyer takes back to the house. But there were other moments, the third down conversions from Will Howard that were absolutely huge. G. Scott having a huge third down play where he could have gotten 3 yards on it on 3rd and 8, set up a 4th and 5. He ends up getting 6 yards and sets up a 4th and 2. Will Howard's able to run, does trip before he gets to the end zone, but at the end of the day, remarkable stuff from this team. And then every time that Texas felt like they were knocking on the door, like they might be able to take over this game, Ohio State had an answer, and it was really remarkable to watch. But overall, I think this was a really necessary win for Ohio State. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't necessarily, you get up by 34 points and you kind of just sit on the ball the rest of the game. They had to battle in this one for the entirety of the game, really, until that Jack Sawyer touchdown happened. It was a very close game that Texas very well could have won, but Ohio State made the couple of plays. Will Howard made some winning plays. The D-line owned the day in a lot of different ways, and when they needed big plays, Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, TreVeyon Henderson, Lathan Ransom, all of these guys stepped up in a huge way and put them in a position to win this game, put them in a position to make that 1 or 2 plays that made a difference in this game. I knew it was going to be a crazy one. It absolutely was, and Jack Sawyer was the one that made the final play to really send them to the national title. Definitely going to be a play that they talk about for a very long time around Columbus. But how Ohio State won this game, the D-line disruption was very real. Pretty much the entirety of the game, they controlled the offensive line of scrimmage, and definitely was something that Texas was a little bit worried about going into this game. Now, Texas did an okay job in pass pro for different points during this game. Obviously, some of the sacks were Quinn Ewers' fault. Some of the sacks were just misses on the especially right side of that offensive line. Something to think about and something we'll talk about here in the next segment. But overall, 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 3 yards per RB rush in this game for Texas. It was absolute domination. It's something that Texas really struggled with, really against any elite defensive line throughout the year, and it was definitely something they struggled with on Friday. And then championship plays. This is not something that's going to be a stat, and it's not something that you're going to see on the sheet very much. But the reality is, Caleb Downs saved a touchdown in the second drive for Texas, where Ryan Wingo, if he gets past him, he is gone, and he's there. Texas goes up, and it's definitely a different conversation going forward. And then G. Scott set up a better 4th down, absolutely huge play where it looked like Jahdae Barron might have him down for a 3-yard gain. He ends up getting a 6-yard gain and sets up a 4th down. And then obviously the 2 big time plays on the goal line, obviously huge plays, but remarkable just little plays throughout this game that put them in better positions to win. And obviously they were one of those teams that has all the guys to make those plays, and they really showed up in this game. And then finally, elite tackling. They were all over the place, and it was one of those teams, obviously like Texas is, that if you miss a couple of tackles, they will make you pay and they will score a ton of points on you. But Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, and all the guys on the back end just came downhill and made play after play after play. Caleb Downs especially, Lathan Ransom made some huge plays. Davison Igbinosin, another one that made some big plays. So overall, it was absolutely huge because you know what this Texas team can do. You know the speed that they have, and you miss a couple of tackles, everything can change in a game, but they didn't miss those couple of tackles. If he misses that Ryan Wingo tackle, it's an entirely different game with an entirely different story and a lot of different things that Ohio State just won the margins in this game when they very badly had to. But obviously, Ohio State had a game where not everything clicked, where everything kind of went a little bit awry. Jeremiah Smith only had one catch for 3 yards. It was definitely a game where it wasn't as pretty as the one that you felt like you had the first couple of games, but it's one that you're going to need. There's no doubt about it, especially playing a team like Notre Dame, and we'll talk about that here in a second, where it's going to be a different defense that they're going to face and might be a little bit more advantageous for them, but something we'll talk about here in a second when we get into the little preview for that game. But remarkable from Ohio State, remarkable from all these players, and the two guys that made the biggest plays of the day were TreVeyon Henderson and were Jack Sawyer. The two guys that came back to school, did not have to, definitely could have been drafted last year, but decided to come back to Ohio State. They make the plays that move them on to the championship game, and Texas we'll have a chance to talk about them here in a second. But yet another game that ends a couple of yards away from a national title berth, another game that is a little bit tough to swallow. Obviously, very optimistic about what the future holds, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But definitely one that they're going to remember for quite some time, and especially that pitch call on second and goal is definitely one that they're going to remember for a while around there in Austin, and hopefully they can right the ship in 2025, and that's actually what we'll talk about here in this next segment. We'll get into Texas, and we'll talk about just where do they go from here. You know, what are they losing going into this offseason? Obviously, a lot of different people walking out the door. The Arch Manning era begins, and a lot of different stuff to talk about with Texas, and we'll do it all right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about that Cotton Bowl game. Ohio State wins a dramatic game where Jack Sawyer makes the biggest play of the entire season, and could be the play that they remember for quite some time as the play that got them a national title. But we'll obviously get into that in a couple of segments, but let's talk about where Texas goes from here. Obviously, a very, very tough loss, definitely one that feels eerily similar to that one they had against Washington in 2023, but at the end of the day, back-to-back trips to the national semifinals is nothing to turn up your nose at, and definitely a lot of things going into this next year. Obviously, one of the biggest ones is what it looks like with that guy under center, what it looks like with Arch Manning as the guy under center for Texas as QB1, and it's definitely big shoes to fill. There's no doubt about that. Quinn Ewers, as much as he was maligned, as much questions as there were, and we might actually get into this in the next couple of days, talk about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning and how it was a little bit unfair what Quinn Ewers was expected to do while at Texas, but at the end of the day, he is walking out the door. He is someone that has led them kind of back to the mountaintop of college football, and now it is Arch's turn to kind of take over around there, but he's not the only one they're losing by any means. They are going to lose at least 3 offensive linemen. Kelvin Banks, Hayden Connor have already declared, and Jake Majors will follow probably pretty soon here, maybe even today, and then Cam Williams is another name to watch, definitely a guy that could come back, could possibly go. It sounds like they're pushing very hard to get him to come come back, but a lot of different people have him in the first round, so a lot of different questions around that. Definitely something to watch. For defense, you're losing Jahdae Barron, you're losing Andrew Makuba, and then on the front end, you have Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins walking out the door, David Benda from that linebacker room. That being said, the defense will be fine. If I'm being totally honest, Colin Simmons is one of the best pass rushers in the country in 2025. Anthony Hill, the same exact thing for linebackers. Ethan Burke, a couple of guys on the back end. They might be able to get Michael Taft back, and that's something we'll talk about here in a second. But overall, they have a lot of guys that are going to be ready to roll for that defense. Not a group that I'm super worried about going into 2025, but definitely some guys to replace on that back end, especially Jahdae Barron is an absolute beast and someone that had a ton to do with how good they were against the pass this year. But you move on to the Arch era, and you have a lot of different questions about what this guy is, how he's going to look when he finally gets the reins, and, why didn't he get the reins earlier? And that's been a question that a lot of people have had. I think the reality is there's a lot of nuances to that Texas offense. There's a lot of different things that you have to worry about, and there's a lot of different blitz pickups and different things that just have to happen. We saw Nico Iamaleava really struggle with that this year. Different things that it felt like he was, inches away from really clicking, from really hitting, and those little things definitely got in his way in a lot of different ways. So you move forward to Arch, and you feel definitely confident. There's no doubt about that. The ability is very, very obvious. It's downright insane in a lot of different ways, and now you move forward, and you just hope that he has that, mental ability that Quinn Ewers definitely had throughout his career, and can he step up to the plate in a big way right off the jump? And a big question is going to be the wide receiver room. How good does that look? How good does that look going forward? And you're probably going to lose Matthew Golden. Now, the question is, can they hold on to him? It's definitely something that they're very much pushing for. If they're able to do that, a lot of the issues that they would have in that wide receiver room will likely be handled in a lot of different ways. You'll have Golden, you'll have DeAndre Moore, who played a big-time role, you'll have Ryan Wingo coming back, so you'll have plenty of talent in that room, especially if you get Matthew Golden back. Now, if you don't, you'll probably be more than fine, probably have to go into the portal to pick up a guy or two, but at the end of the day, they have plenty of talent in that room. I don't think that's going to be a huge issue, but you are losing Gunnar Helm, you are losing Isaiah Bond, you're possibly losing Matthew Golden, and a couple other guys that played a big-time part in this team, so definitely something that you're going to have to watch for, and they did a great job of replacing the wide receiver talent that left last year. This might be an even bigger task to do it this year. So a lot of different things to talk about, and definitely a room that we're going to watch very closely over the next month, and definitely in that spring portal window possibly. But for 2025, I think the biggest thing to watch is CJ Baxter in a lot of different ways. He obviously got hurt in August and didn't get to play the entirety of the season. He is their power back in a lot of different ways. He runs great between the tackles, and that was a big-time struggle for this team this year. So it's going to be a huge piece getting back onto that team. It's going to be a guy that you're going to see pretty much as the running back one. Now, Jaden Blue did declare for the draft yesterday, so it's going to be him, Trey Wisner, and a couple other guys. Jarrett Gibson is someone that we'll talk about in time, but definitely is someone to watch there. But overall, CJ Baxter is a huge player for this team. If he was on this team, I think he possibly could have gotten a couple more wins. Those red zone issues wouldn't have been quite as bad. Still would have been an issue most likely, but not quite as bad. And definitely, he would have been the back in there for that goal line stand. He would have been the guy that was running it right down the center of that defense. I can almost promise you that. So overall, definitely a guy you're going to want to get back. Definitely a guy that if you get him back and utilize him correctly, this team could be downright impossible to stop offensively, especially in that run game with Arch Manning's legs. But this team is going to be talented. That is never going to be an issue for Steve Sarkisian in Texas. That is never going to be something that they have to worry about. Now, you do have things to worry about. There's no doubt about that. Is Arch Manning going to be the guy that we fully expect? Is he going to be ready to roll in year one? Because the reality is you're going to have to make the CFP, and that might not even be enough for people to look at Arch Manning the way that he probably should be looked at if you were able to pull that off. But it's going to be, in some ways, insufferable to hear people talk about Arch Manning over the next little bit, because I think he's got to be perfect. Let's be totally honest. You have that last name. You have all the pedigree coming out of high school. You're playing at a program that wants to compete for national titles. You are going to be judged in a different light than a lot of different kids out there. Now, he seems to be more than capable of handling it, has a very good head on his shoulders, obviously has a ton of ability in the world, but the reality is there's a lot of different questions about what he can do in terms of leadership. There's a lot of different questions of, can he understand the nuances of this offense, and can he just be the guy that everyone's expecting him to be, which is essentially perfect in a lot of different ways. So overall, I think there's a lot of different questions, and one of the bigger ones is all the players moving on. You obviously have Quinn Ewers, you have Kelvin Banks, and maybe 2, 3, 4 other offensive linemen, a lot of different guys that could be walking out that door, and definitely something you're going to have to worry about. And then obviously Jahdae Barron, a guy that on the back end of that defense that gave them structure, that gave them meaning, and then Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, maybe Michael Taft, maybe Matthew Golden. So a couple other guys to watch there. It's going to be a huge NFL draft for Texas, and definitely one where I don't know if they're going to break the record that UGA said. It might come down to a couple of those players that might come back or go, but it's going to be a lot of players that end up in the NFL draft for this team, and then you're going to have to rebuild the same way you did last year. They had 11 guys drafted last year, handled that business relatively well, but this is going to be another challenge, and definitely one that Steve Sarkisian has built up a program that seems to be ready for it, but a lot of different questions as you head into 2025, and one of the biggest ones for me is, are they just all in for 2025? There's been a lot of talk around the Texas insiders that this could be the way they go about business, kind of the Ohio State model from this year, try to get guys back that possibly could go to the NFL draft like Cam Williams, like Michael Taft, like Matthew Golden, and if you're able to get those guys back in the fray, you're going to have an incredible year. There's almost no doubt about that. That offensive line is still going to be downright incredible with Cam Williams and DJ Campbell and Trevor Gooseby, who's played such great football for them throughout the back half of the season. But overall, this is definitely going to be a big-time question, likely one that will be answered throughout this week. Does Matthew Golden end up going to the draft? I tend to lean yes, but definitely sounds like there's a lot of push from Texas people to get him to come back. Cam Williams, the exact same. Michael Taft, I expect to come back, actually, but definitely going to be a lot of things to watch. And if they go all in, if they say that 2025 is the year, you can see the confidence that they have in Arch Manning. And then replacing O-line starters is going to be a huge question this offseason. Will it be 3? Will it be 4? Is Cam Williams going to come into the mix? Is DJ Campbell possibly going to jump into the draft? I don't expect that to happen, but definitely something that a lot of people are watching right now. They could replace all 5 offensive linemen. I don't expect them to. I expect them to replace 4, maybe 3, depending on what Cam Williams does. But overall, that's going to be a huge question. They've done a great job building up that offensive line room, but still something definitely to watch. They've had a couple of different transfers in, and definitely some guys that they're going to want to lock down just to make that a little bit easier. If they get Cam Williams back, though, I think they'll be more than fine at that position in a lot of different ways. And then, are the wide receiver replacements ready? This was a question last year, and it was definitely one where if they didn't get Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden, they probably wouldn't have been ready in a lot of different ways. But you got to get some guys. There's no doubt about that. But you still have Khalil Lockett, Jamie French coming in from the class that you're bringing in. I believe they got on campus yesterday, actually. And a couple of different guys. Aaron Butler's another one to watch in a lot of different ways. And a couple of guys that are going to bounce around and make some big-time plays for you, and they're going to have to be ready pretty much right away. If they're not ready to roll, if DeAndre Moore doesn't take that next step, it's going to be a team that's going to leave a little bit on the table in 2025. So going to be interesting to watch what those wide receivers look like throughout spring. Who do they bring in? How many guys do they bring in? And when can they bring them in? Can they bring them in before spring, or do they have to wait for that spring portal cycle? Probably will have to wait for that spring portal cycle, but moving forward to 2025, some players to watch. I mean, Arch Manning's a duh. He's got to be the guy in a lot of different ways. He's got to be the leader of this team. He's got to be the guy that everyone looks to, and it might be a little bit unfair at times, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, that's what you get when your name is Manning, and that's what you get when you're the starting quarterback at Texas. So a lot of different stuff on his shoulders, and we'll hear a lot throughout spring about this kid. And then C.J. Baxter, he was the guy that would have gotten the ball in a lot of different points for Texas in the red zone throughout this year. He's going to be back in 2025 and will be a huge player for them. Will definitely be the running back one. The question is, how great is he? How ready is he to go? And how does that ACL feel after a little bit of a tear this year? And then Alex January is another guy you're going to want to watch. He is someone that we've seen the last 2 years. Texas has dudes at defensive tackle pretty much every single year. I think this is going to be the guy in 2025. Definitely a breakout star for me, and we'll obviously follow him and a lot of other guys around Texas throughout the offseason, but I really like Alex January, and I think he's going to make a huge amount of plays for Texas in 2025. And then you look forward to 2025, and yes, that first game is up in Columbus against that team that they just lost to. It is going to be insane. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have Arch Manning against maybe Julian Sain, maybe a couple other guys, depending on how that spring goes. But overall, going to be an incredible game, going to throw Arch Manning right into the mix right away. And it's going to be a lot of eyes on him. And if he doesn't win that game, it's going to be a lot of people saying a lot of things. But the reality is, overall, a relatively manageable schedule. You play a lot of the teams that, like you played this year, bottom half of the SEC in a lot of different ways. A&M, I expect to be a little bit better. Georgia, I expect to be a little bit better. I expect Florida to be a whole lot better. So there's different moments where they definitely could get tripped up here. But overall, very manageable schedule. Absolutely one where you look at this and say they should be a CFP team. There's almost no doubt about that. Definitely something that he's going to have to deal with, Arch Manning, and a lot of different things that they're going to have to deal with. But overall, you look at what 2025 is going to be. A lot of optimism. There's no doubt about that. A lot of people are going to be putting this team as the number one team in the country going into 2025. A lot of people are going to be saying that they're the national title winners. A lot of people are going to be saying that if Arch Manning doesn't win a title or doesn't win a Heisman, he is a downright disappointment. A lot of different conversation around this team going into 2025. Now, I do have a question if 2025 or 2026 is the year that they really get everything to click and everything really falls into place. But at the end of the day, you do have a lot of really talented guys. There are definitely some aspects that you have to get a little bit better, like that wide receiver room, like that O-line room, like a couple of different areas around this team. But they're going to be plenty talented. They're going to have the guy at quarterback that everyone's going to be watching. They're going to have just ridiculous talent on the outside in a lot of different ways, and they should have that running back room in a little bit better of a position than it was this year. They're going to be one of those teams that you're going to see on probably number one in a lot of different way too early top 25 rankings. I'll probably do mine next week, so be on the lookout for that. But overall, it's going to be a lot of different questions. There's no doubt about that. They're going to have to make sure that wide receiver room is ready. You got to make sure that O-line room is a little bit better than it is right now, and a lot of different questions for this team. But you got the guy that's going to lead the way. It is going to be Arch Manning going into 2025, and it's going to be a lot of different questions around that kid and a lot of different critics around that kid as he goes into his start of his college career. But going to be an interesting year in 2025. Probably going to be one of the most followed, one of the most interesting teams in 2025 is going to be Texas because of that number 16. Obviously going to be a very, very talked about, very much maligned guy in a lot of different ways, but going to be a guy that has everything on his shoulders. But we'll talk about that. We have plenty of time, obviously, to get into Arch Manning throughout the offseason, but let's get into an early look into the national title game. Ohio State against Notre Dame, going to be an incredible game down there in Atlanta, and we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just took a quick look at what 2025 could look like for the Texas Longhorns. Obviously, the new sheriff in town is Arch Manning, and a lot of eyes, a lot of questions, a lot of different talk around that guy going into this upcoming season, and I don't know if he can do anything but win a national title and be a success. But at the end of the day, let's look at today's national title. Let's look at the one that's coming up next in a week from today on Monday. That just ridiculous that they play on a Monday, but at the end of the day, we do have an incredible matchup going on in Atlanta, Georgia, and a matchup that I don't think a lot of people picked to start this thing. Now, a lot of people did say that one of these two teams could win the national title, but I think people were a little bit skeptical of what Notre Dame could actually do among the elite teams in the country. Obviously, Ohio State had their fair share of questions coming off that Michigan loss, and that's kind of where I want to talk. There's a lot of different things to talk about as we go into this one. Obviously, a new head coach will win a national title. A team that got talked about in a lot of different ways will win a national title in this year, and the big time thing is obviously they both had weird years. Notre Dame starts the year with a week 1 win over A&M in College Station, and then returns to South Bend to lose to Northern Illinois. And you have a million questions about this team. You have a million questions about Marcus Freeman and what he can do at that level, if he's going to be a guy that just continues to be one that loses a game he's not supposed to, falls out on the different parts of the season that his team very much could be a part of, and definitely bows out of the CFP. That obviously didn't happen. They were able to battle back. They were able to find their way into the CFP and make their way to the national title. And then Ohio State had this moment. It's been talked about a million different times at this point, but Ohio State had a stumble in the middle of the season, was able to catch their feet, and definitely looked like a team that was well on their way to Indianapolis for another Big Ten title. And then Michigan came in, and they were able to beat them 13-10, and a lot of people had questions. People said if Ryan Day loses to Tennessee, or even if he doesn't, if he doesn't win the national title, should he be fired? Does Ohio State have to just reset in a lot of different ways going into 2025 and just see what happened and see where they can go from here? And then they became a buzzsaw. They tore through Tennessee, they tore through Oregon, and then they got a tough fight this past weekend from Texas. But overall, they've looked like the best team in the country the last couple of weeks, and I don't know if it happens without that Michigan loss. As crazy as that sounds, it's obviously not something that they want on their resume, but definitely something that you're going to have to think about as you go throughout this game. There's a lot of motivation on that Ohio State side because of this game in a lot of different ways. So both these teams use the games that could have been games that buried them to kind of propel them to this moment and put them in a position to win these games, and definitely shows you just how good these coaches are, just how good the leadership is on this team, on both these teams, and definitely will put them in a great position going into this game. But as we get into this game, they're both led by their defenses. I don't think that needs to be said. I'd put both these teams in the top 3 defenses in the country pretty much any way you cut it, if I'm being totally honest. Now, Texas is a team that I probably slot somewhere in between them. Maybe Notre Dame would be above Texas, but at the end of the day, it is a battle between elite teams. And you talk about the back end, there's some truly incredible players on the back end of both these defenses. Caleb Downs kind of highlights that for Ohio State. Xavier Watts on the other side for Notre Dame. Both players that are as good as it gets in the sport, plain and simple. They are both guys that fly down and run support. They are plenty good in coverage, and are both guys that Xavier Watts probably going to be a first-round draft pick this year. Caleb Downs going to be a first-round draft pick next year, and possibly a top 10 pick, if I'm being totally honest. Remarkable player, and you saw it all over the field against Texas. You will see it all over the field in the national championship, I promise you that. But then you have the guys on the front 7, and they're downright special as well. There's no doubt about that. Riley Mills obviously out for Notre Dame, a huge loss there, but Howard Cross, Donovan Hinish, Tui Alamaka, they have guys on the front 7. There's no doubt about that. And then Jack Sawyer, JTT, Ty Hamilton, a million other guys on the other side. Remarkable talent all over the place for these defenses. And then you move on to the offenses, and it's kind of different groups. You look at what Notre Dame does, you look at what Ohio State does, 2 very, very different things. But at the end of the day, these guys are going to be a huge question mark. These guys are going to have a lot of different things on their shoulders, and they're definitely going to have a million different things to think about, especially Marcus Freeman, especially when you talk about number 4 for Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith. He is an absolute nightmare, and you look at what Notre Dame has done throughout this year. Huge man coverage team. They love to play man coverage. They love to be able to blitz and throw different things at the quarterback. Now, the problem is the way Texas was able to hold Jeremiah Smith under wraps was playing zone, was kind of bracketing him in a lot of different ways. And will Notre Dame do that, or do they trust their guys on the outside to cover this kid? Because I don't know if I would trust anyone in the world to cover that kid, if I'm being totally honest. So a lot of different questions for Marcus Freeman. And then for Ryan Day, I don't think it has to be said anymore. The reality is he is in a position where he's got to win a national title, and he has a million different questions. Both offensive lines have different questions. Notre Dame has a couple of injuries that continue to pop up. Ohio State has done a really good job over the past couple of games with a group that has had some injuries in the past, but the reality is there's still questions there. There's still guys that have to step up in big-time moments, and there were moments in that Texas game, especially on the interior, where they really struggled. Texas defensive line really did control that game kind of the same way that Ohio State's defensive line did, but overall, a lot of different things that these two guys are going to have to deal with, and a lot of different questions as they head into this one. But overall, I think, one more thing here, but the biggest thing that I want to talk about is in these coaching departments. And the play calling is going to be downright elite in this game. Frankly, I don't think you could find two better coaching staffs in the entire country if you tried. You have Chip Kelly against Al Golden, you have Mike Denbrock against Jim Knowles, you have Ryan Day against Marcus Freeman. It's going to be as good as it gets. I'll be totally honest. It's going to be incredible to watch these two coaching staffs go at it. It's going to be two coaching staffs that have to play chess pretty much the entire day, whether it's Notre Dame playing a little bit more zone early and then Ohio State having to figure out how to get Jeremiah Smith open, or Notre Dame playing man early, Jeremiah Smith making a couple of plays and then Notre Dame having to get past that or having to find a way to kind of counter that. There's a lot of different questions for both these teams. A couple of mistakes here and there will totally change this game, and both these teams have been relatively good at keeping away from mistakes, especially Notre Dame, but definitely something to watch as you get into this game, because just like the Texas game, just like the Notre Dame-Penn State game, it is going to come down to the margin. It's going to come down to a couple of plays here and there that make the difference in this game. But storylines to watch in this one. Marcus Freeman is playing his former team. You will hear that 1,000,001 times throughout this week. I can absolutely promise you that. He was a linebacker for Ohio State back in the late 2000s, was a remarkable player for this team, and definitely a guy that has a lot of pride in being an Ohio State Buckeye. Obviously going to be a talking point going into this one. If you lose to a guy that was your coach, or was a player on your team, there's going to be a lot of questions, no doubt about that. And then Ryan Day's second shot at glory, the first time he played 2019 LSU, and I don't think anyone blames him for not winning that game. Now you move forward to a game that you're the aggressor, that you're the favorite, that you're the team that definitely should win, and if you don't, a lot of people are going to still have questions. That's the reality of this season for Ohio State, that you got to win a national title. One way or the other, you have to find a way to win this game. And then transfer quarterbacks, leading veteran teams. You know, you look at these two guys, they've done an incredible job stepping into these two programs that are very, very big, very, very tough to step into, and they've become absolute leaders. They've been huge, huge players for this team. Not necessarily the most physically imposing guys in either respect. You know, don't have the biggest arms, don't necessarily have the most speed, but definitely make some plays with their legs. But the reality is they've elevated these teams because of their leadership. They've elevated these teams because of their stability in some tough moments, and they've played some really remarkable football throughout this year. So, and they're playing about as good as you've seen them play throughout this year in the last couple of games. So, going to be an incredible matchup between those two. A huge moment for Ryan Day, a moment for Marcus Freeman to kind of, I don't want to say get back at his old team, but get a win over his old team. And then it's going to be an incredible one. There's no doubt about that. These are two teams that have done an incredible job over the last couple of weeks to put them in a great position going forward. And there's going to be a lot of people talking about Notre Dame as if they don't have a shot in this game. They absolutely have a shot. Marcus Freeman's done an incredible job building up this team, and they are not going to hand you a lot, and they're going to make a lot of good plays on defense. For Ohio State, this is it. You found a way to get to this game after a devastating loss to Michigan. The reality is, you lose this game, not many people care about what you did. I'll be totally honest. That's the reality of being the Ohio State head coach, of being the Ohio State team, and it's going to be a huge battle for them. But you got two senior quarterbacks going for glory. You have two head coaches looking for their very first title. You have veteran defenders all over the place trying to get that last moment in the sun for their teams and really go off into the sunset. And Xavier Watts, a Jack Sawyer, as a champion for this for their program. But one more game in the college football season. It is Ohio State Notre Dame. It will go on in Atlanta, Georgia next Monday. Going to be an incredible game. Two weird seasons for these teams. Some bad losses in there, some great wins, and when it mattered most, they stepped up in a big-time way and have had some incredible wins the last couple of weeks. They're trying to get one more in the national title, and it is going to be an absolute battle down there in Atlanta. I can almost promise you that. Two teams that are very, very aggressive, especially from those back-end players, and they're going to fly down. They're going to hit them very aggressively. It's going to be a war of attrition. I can almost promise you that. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about some semifinal overreactions. There are a couple in here that I might be a little bit aggressive with. There are a couple here that I fully agree with, and definitely are things that we're going to have to talk about going forward into this week and really into the offseason. But we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just took a quick early look at that national title game that is going to go on a week from today in Atlanta. Incredible game between Ohio State and Notre Dame, but now we got to move into the semifinal overreactions, and a couple of these might be a little bit aggressive. A couple of these I fully agree with and definitely feel like they're outright facts, but there's a lot of different questions about these teams coming out of these games, especially Penn State and Texas, but we'll get to all these teams real quickly, and we'll do a quick overreaction from these games. I understand a couple of these are a little bit wild, but stick with me. I'll try to explain them all. But for Penn State, 2024 was not the step forward that everyone wants it to be. And now I understand that I think they did get a little bit better in a couple of different areas throughout this year. But the reality is you look up at the end of the year and you've beaten every team that you're supposed to beat. You've lost to every team that you're supposed to lose to, and you're sitting there wondering, how much better were we actually? How much closer were we to a national title? Because the reality is, you got into the 12 team. That was incredible. That was an awesome thing to watch. You got to the semifinal of the 12 team. So a lot of two great wins over SMU and Boise State. No one expected you to lose those games. No one was, banking on you losing those games. And everyone, when the 12-team playoff was introduced, said, well, Penn State's going to benefit from that a ton. Penn State's going to be in a great position to get into the playoff, to possibly make a little bit of a run. But at the end of the day, you lost to Notre Dame, you lost to Ohio State, you lost to Oregon, and now you're sitting here wondering, are we a different team? Are we a team that is still elevating? Or are we a team that just got into the 12-team playoffs because they had a 12-team playoff and not a 4-team? Now, people will argue, they would have gotten into the 4-team because they were the number 4 in the last CFP rankings. I would argue that it would have gone differently. I frankly would argue that Notre Dame probably would have got in over Penn State, if I'm being totally honest. I can't necessarily, prove that, obviously, so not necessarily something that we can take to the bank or say absolutely confidently, but definitely something that I think is worth talking about. And I think there's a lot of different questions about what will happen going forward. And Anthony will actually talk about Marcus Freeman here in a second, so I'll get to that question. But overall, I think there's a big-time question around those wide receivers. And frankly, they've gotten worse over the last 4 years. They've progressively had less and less catches throughout the last couple of years, and they're downright close to 100 catches on the year. And it's something that just cannot happen going forward. And there's a lot of different questions about what is going to happen going forward for this team. But they did get Kyron Hudson. They did get Devontae Ross, two very talented receivers. Is that enough? Is that a full fix for this offense, or is that something that you're going to come in 2025, in a year from now, you're going to look up and say, those were good pieces, they weren't great pieces. Kind of like Julian Fleming was, not the guy that you expected him to be. Obviously, definitely hurt this group, and I don't know. Drew Aller, I think, is the biggest piece of this. He got better this year. There's no doubt about that. But the two best defenses that he faced, he looked wobbly at best. He looked like a guy that was not super comfortable. He's still a very young player, still a guy that I think has a ceiling that is a number 1 overall pick type ceiling. But the reality is he did not take the step forward that you wanted him to take this year. He very well could in 2025, but he's got to take that next step in 2025. So Penn State got better this year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They got a little bit closer this year, but it wasn't necessarily a step forward. It wasn't necessarily the moment in the sun that you were all looking for, and it wasn't, getting that huge win. I look throughout this year, I think the Illinois win was great. I think the Wisconsin win was great. I think the USC win was fantastic. None of those wins were the thing that was keeping you from being that elite team. None of those wins were the thing that was any different than it was before. Those are the wins that you were already getting. So it's not necessarily a position that Penn State is unfamiliar with. You can argue that it was a little bit of a step forward, but at the end of the day, you look at 2024 for Penn State and you're still looking up and saying, there's obviously something different between us and the elite teams in this country, and it's got to be fixed at some point here pretty soon. And then let's talk about Marcus Freeman here for a second, Anthony, because I think he might just be a top 3 head coach in this sport. He is downright incredible, and he has done such a good job with this team. But the reality is, he does have those couple of losses that a lot of people are talking about, and a lot of people have the right to talk about. You lose to Marshall, you lose to NIU, people are going to have a million different questions. But every single coach will tell you that the best thing that they do, or the most important thing that they do, is get their guys back up. After they lose a game, after they lose a really tough one, whether that's to an NIU or to a Georgia, you are in a position where you have to get your guys back up. You have to get your guys back ready to roll, and he's done an incredible job doing that. He's been absolutely incredible throughout this year, and so incredible that a lot of NFL jobs are possibly looking at him. A lot of different defensive coordinator jobs, a lot of different even head coaching jobs, and we'll talk about that here in in the last segment. But overall, remarkable coach. He's done an incredible job. 32 wins in the first 3 years is best in Notre Dame history, and they've had some darn good head coaches up there in South Bend. But overall, he coming off 2 games where he outcoaches Kirby Smart and James Franklin, and now he's staring down a national title. It's a little bit tougher because the reality of coaching is you want to see sustained success. You want to see the guy that has been there for 5 years and has continued to be at the top of the sport, Dabo Swinney, a Kirby Smart, a Dan Lanning Dan Lanning might not be fair. A couple of different guys throughout this country that have had that sustained success, that have done really, really good jobs over a decade, over 5 years, over 7 years, and you definitely want to see that. But you look around the country, you could go Dabo Swinney, you could go Steve Sarkisian, Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer, Kirby Smart setting the pace. He is number one as far as I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, you could go with a lot of different guys in the next 2 spots. But Freeman has a great argument right now. He's done a great job with this team. The recruiting profile has done an incredible job of getting a lot better. And Anthony does have a question about these recruiting. He does struggle to get that wide receiver talent. That is something that Notre Dame and Penn State has struggled with the last couple of years, and it's something that Notre Dame does have to get better at. Now, what I will say is I do think Jaden Greathouse was a fantastic pickup at the wide receiver position. I think they've done a good job of getting guys that might not be absolutely ready right away, but definitely can make effects down the road and definitely can be a big-time player down the road in the next couple of years. But you look at what Marcus Freeman has done overall in recruiting. It's been elevation. There's no doubt about that. From what Brian Kelly did to what they're doing right now, it's just a little bit different. The quarterback talent that they're bringing in, and a guy like CJ Carr, is a little bit different than they were able to get before. And that defense is always going to have a ton of guys that are going to make some big-time plays, but it's definitely a group now that feels like not only one that's going to be, serviceable, but maybe not elite up to the national standard. This is a downright elite group. This is a top 3 group in the country, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So overall, yes, there are the 2 inexcusable losses. There's no doubt about that. All great coaches have moments where it doesn't necessarily go their way. Now, Marshall and NIU might be a little bit more aggressive than I'm thinking right now, but overall, it's about getting your team back on track. It's about putting your team in a position to win a national title, especially in the 12-team era. You can take a loss. That's the reality, and you have to be able to bounce back. He's done an incredible job with this team on Monday. If he wins a national title, I think it's really hard to keep him out of this group. He's done an incredible job this year, and not only this year, but the second he showed up in Notre Dame, it just changed that little bit, and that was all that they needed. They've done an incredible job with this team, and we'll see if he ends up jumping ship to that possible next level, to the NFL level as a coordinator or a head coach. But for the time being, I'd put him in my top 3 as head coaches in college football, and if he sticks around, he could definitely build off that and start meeting Kirby Smart where he is. But moving on to Texas, coaching kept you from a title. I'll be totally honest. This is the reality of the situation. When you look back at that Ohio State game, now we can talk about Quinn Ewers. He definitely played a part in this, definitely kept them from being the elite offensive team that they had the capability of being. But there's 2 big-time play calls that really kept them from winning that game against Ohio State, that kept them from being in a position to win a national title, and it was Sark and PK that made the mistakes. It was in the Ohio State game, you had the blitz on the Travion Henderson touchdown. That was just a bad miss. There's no doubt about that. You have them all the way backed up with about 30 seconds or 15 seconds left in the first half. You just got to make sure you get the guy on the ground. So that was a big-time mistake. And then, obviously, the second and goal pitch is going to be one that you talk about, but obviously not the only reason. I'm not arguing that, Sark totally buried his team here, but definitely something that needs to be talked about as you get into the offseason. The other part of it was the ASU game. You throw the INT late up for Quinn Ewers in. He had no business throwing it, but they had no business calling a play where you're throwing a deep ball. That's the reality of that situation. So you're in a position where you have a great team, and you have a great coach. I'll be totally honest with you. He is a fantastic coordinator. He is someone that absolutely can win a national title as a head coach. There are a million different questions about, what Anthony just said here. Is he a great coordinator but not a great head coach? I believe he is a great head coach. I believe he is a national title good head coach, and frankly, I think he's going to win a national title while he's at Texas. But at the end of the day, you look back at these last couple of games, they've missed the mark. They've missed the mark just a little bit at different moments throughout this game. And while, Quinn didn't necessarily help at different moments, and the run game absolutely didn't help at different moments, Steve Sarkisian and Pete Kwiatkowski played a little bit of a role in that Ohio State game, definitely put them in a bad position in certain moments, and it's definitely something that's going to stand out. As you look back on this season, there's definitely going to be a lot of people wondering, did Sark do the right thing? Is Sark in a position where can he keep play calling duties? Now, I am fully on the side that he very much should, because the reality is you look around the country, I don't think you can find 5 play callers that are better than Steve Sarkisian, and he did mostly a great job against Ohio State. The Ohio State defense flew around and did some great things, but he did a great job keeping them off balance until that one play call. So now you look back on this season, and they did some great things, and a lot of them are because of Steve Sarkisian, because of his ability to get guys open and work around that run game at different moments and really get the most out of Quinn Ewers. And obviously, the defense with Pete Kwiatkowski did a great job this year and had a number of big-time plays, but it's a tough end of the season, and you look back and you say, a couple of play calls were the difference there. And it's definitely one that hurts. It's definitely one that's going to sting for a while. But this coaching staff is still elite in every sense of the word. You know, you look up and down this coaching staff, you're probably not going to find 3 better in the entire country. So you look at the issues that they had in the last couple of games, a lot of them do fall on Steve Sarkisian's shoulders. There's no doubt about that. And I think he would tell you that pretty much most readily. But then you look back at what they have on that roster and what they have on that coaching staff, it's about as good as you'll find in the country. So overall, I do think coaching kept them from a national title. I do think if, they don't make those couple of play calls, they're probably on their way to Atlanta right now, probably setting up to play against Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, every coach has this moment. Every coach has moments where you get close to the mountaintop and then you fall short. Sark's going to have those moments, but I fully believe that he is going to be a guy that we talk about for a very long time in college football, and I really do think he is a great head coach. I really do think he's going to win a national title, but this time around, he definitely, in some ways, kept them from a national title. And then Ohio State. That was a very nice moment. There's no doubt about that. Jack Sawyer had his moment in the sun. Ryan Day had a very nice moment. It doesn't mean anything. Let's be totally honest. When you look at this Ohio State team, it was clear from the beginning of the year that you win a national title or nothing else. It's national title or bust, and you're in a position where you just very badly have to execute. And Anthony, I do think he has to keep play calling duties. I think if you're going to find someone that's better at play calling than Steve Sarkisian, you're looking at a couple of different guys that are not necessarily as good at what Steve Sarkisian does. So the reality is, I think you're in a position where you have one of the best play callers in the country. He missed the mark a little bit in this one, but he's still absolutely elite in every sense of the word. But getting back to Ohio State here, when Ohio State lost to Michigan, the bar was set. There's no doubt about that. It was win a national title or we're going to run you out of town in a lot of different ways. So you have 2 incredible games. You beat Tennessee, you beat Oregon, you beat Texas, and you have an incredible game there, an incredible moment, and all your fans are incredibly happy. You don't win on Monday, and everyone's back down on you. Ryan Day continues to get a lot of crap if they lose on Monday. That's the reality. You're a huge favorite going into this game. The other part of it is Marcus Freeman. He does play a role here because the reality is he is an Ohio State alum. If you have an Ohio State alum beat you in a national title on top of Ryan Day, people are going to be really mad. I'm just going to be totally honest with you. People are going to be mad that they didn't hire him. People are going to be mad that they didn't fire Ryan Day last year and get Marcus Freeman. There's going to be a million people that have a million different theories that a lot of them won't make sense, but the reality is Ohio State has to win a national title. Ryan Day has done some things to fix his image with this fan base, but he hasn't done the thing. The goal has not changed. Texas was just a piece to the puzzle. They did an incredible job winning that game, finding a way to get those couple of big-time plays, but you look around, nothing's much changed. You still have to win that national title. You still have to raise that trophy, and if you don't, then a lot of people are still going to be looking at Ryan Day and saying, is he the guy that we want leading Ohio State going forward? It's going to be a huge question. It's going to be something that we talk about a lot around this show and around every single show in the college football space. But overall, it was a very nice moment. It was very cool. It was awesome to watch. It was a moment that Jack Sawyer probably could not have dreamed up any better. But you look at it right now and you say, it doesn't all that much matter. If you don't win a national title, people are still going to come down on you. They're going to say those 3 wins did not mean anything. They're going to say those 3 wins were not all that impressive, frankly. So you got to win the national title. You got to finish these last 60 minutes. You got to be able to beat Notre Dame. If you don't, a lot of people are going to still have questions. A lot of people are going to still bury Ryan Day, and a lot of people are going to be saying that this Ohio State team left everything on the table this year, and now they look forward to 2025 and say, everyone's walking out the door for sure this time. It's not just they could walk out the door. It is they are going to walk out the door. Jack Sawyer is leaving. Travion Henderson is leaving. Emeka Buka is leaving. So now you look forward to 2025, and you have a million questions. But at the end of the day, you have a job to do. You have a job to finish, and if you don't, then it's almost like he didn't do anything in the first place. So a lot of questions around this team, and we will get into it obviously in time. We'll get into a couple of different things tomorrow, a lot of things tomorrow about the national title. But overall, let's take our last break here. When we come back, we'll do a little bit of a weekend update. We'll get into Carson Beck committing to Miami, the implications of that, Miami getting a new DC, a couple of different things around Marcus Freeman in the NFL, and a couple of different things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some overreactions from those CFP games. Obviously, the biggest one is Ohio State. You did a great thing. You beat Texas. You had a great moment in the sun, but if you don't win that game on Monday, it doesn't mean much. I'll be totally honest. It's definitely something that will irk a lot of people around there, but the reality is you got to win a national title. That is the goal, and that will continue to be the goal throughout this week. And we got Anthony, a big-time Hurricanes fan, so why don't we jump into this, and let's talk about Carson Beck. And what we're talking about with Carson Beck is he is committed to Miami. He is officially a Miami Hurricane, and it's a great pickup for Miami in a lot of different ways. Now, you do have the question for Anthony where does he have the mobility? Does he have the ability to get around different situations the same way Cam Ward did? Now, the big thing to think about here is the Miami offensive line will be better next year. I feel fairly confident about that. They brought in Tommy Brockermeyer from TCU. They obviously do have Francis Mauanoa on the left side. Downright beast, going to be one of the best left tackles in the country next year. So overall, it's going to be a different attack. There's no doubt about that. And I do think the run game is going to be a lot better with a lot of these guys, Mark Fletcher especially. So I do think it's going to be a different offense in a lot of different ways from Shannon Dawson. But the reality is, you got a kid that's 24-3 in his career. You have a kid that's played in the SEC championships, that's played in the CFP, that has done so many things that Miami just hasn't quite been able to do through the last couple years. So it's a great pickup. There's no doubt about that. He is going to give you stability at that position. He's going to give you a lot of leadership at that position where you very badly need it with Cam Ward walking out the door. And it's going to be a lot of different things that you have to continue to add for this team, because the reality of this situation as well is Carson Beck's not going to play until you get to summer camp. So he is not going to be on the field with this team. He's not going to be throwing to these receivers until well after spring camp. And now you're going to have to look forward and see just how close they are, just how set they are going into the 2025 season, because there's a lot of different questions. Oh, excuse me, Anthony, my fault. Markel Bell, excuse me. A lot of different talented offensive linemen for that group. So overall, going to be an incredible group up front for Miami. I think a much improved group from this year. But overall, you look forward to what Carson Beck looks like over the next couple of months. It's going to be a lot of different questions. You're going to have to pick up some wide receivers from the portal, I would assume, in that spring portal class. I think you're going to have to get a couple of guys to help him out around the way. But the reality is, he is not going to be fully ready for until summer camp, and you're going to have a lot of different things to figure out until then. You're going to have a lot of different things to put into place so that once he is on the field, once he finally gets a chance to throw these receivers, you can get him full running. You can get him on the ground, absolutely running downhill, and then you're in a position where 2025 can look even better than 2024. You can get to the CFP, you can win the ACC this time around, and put yourself in a great position. Obviously, a lot of money being thrown Carson Beck's way. Sounds like it's going to be about $4 million, making him the highest paid person in the NIL deal in college football history. not necessarily all that surprising to me, if I'm being totally honest. This is the type of money that's going to be thrown around, and overall, we'll talk about it more and more, but I think Miami got a great one here. Now, there's questions about his health. There's questions about how long it will take him to get all the way back in. I think they're real questions. I think they're questions that could very well affect what Miami looks like in 2025. But you look forward to what they have in 2025. I think they got one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer portal last cycle. I think they might have gotten the best one this time around. A very, very talented player, a guy that they weren't talking about him being the number one overall pick for no reason. They weren't just making that up out of thin air. He's a very talented player, definitely a very good processor, and if you figure out that offensive line, it's going to be a very, very potent attack for Miami in 2025 with Carson Beck under center, as long as he is fully healthy, with a huge question here. But sticking with Miami, Miami does have a DC. It is Corey Heatherman. He has come in from Minnesota. A really interesting pickup here. Not the one that I expected. I expected a couple maybe bigger names, a couple of guys that maybe a little bit closer to their footprint, but the reality is, has done a great job with the Minnesota team. 10th in the country in points per game allowed, 6th in yards per game allowed, 4th in yards per play. Very, very talented coach. Definitely, obviously, will get an elevation in talent when he goes down to Miami, so that should help. The other part of this is Miami's going to run a really fast offense. Minnesota does not run a very fast offense. So a couple of those numbers, the 10th in points per game, the 6th in yards per game, the 14th in yards per play, some of that does have to do with just the pace of play up there in the Big Ten comparative to what you're going to face down there in Miami. So it's not the higher I expected. I think it is an awesome one. He's going to be up against it pretty early on. He's going to have to call a lot more plays than he had to call up there in Minnesota. He's going to have to deal with a lot more down there in Miami than he did up there in Minnesota, and it's going to be a huge question. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be one of those guys that you're going to be watching very closely. If they hit on this one, they're going to be in the CFP. If they don't, they're going to be right back in this position and asking if they have to get a new defensive coordinator going into 2026. So I think it's a great hire. I think it's going to be a guy that they're going to love down there, but definitely still some questions around this one, and we'll see how it translates to the Miami and that style of play especially. And we'll talk about Marcus Freeman here for a second, Anthony, because he is getting some interest from NFL teams, particularly the Bears. It sounds like the Bears want to interview him for their head coaching position. I'd be surprised if he ends up taking this. I'd be surprised if the Bears end up really offering this. Now, it does sound like they are serious. It does sound like they do want to sit down and talk with them. It does sound like they do want to see just where his head's at. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think he's going to leave. I think he's going to stay at Notre Dame now. Some of these offers are going to be really good. Let's just be totally honest. And if he does win a national title, maybe it will be the moment for him to ride off into the sunset. But the way that I see it right now, I think he's going to stick at Notre Dame. The Bears will try very, very hard to get him. Obviously, some other people, the Falcons, I would love to have him as our defensive coordinator. But overall, a lot of different guys that are going to be a lot of different positions that you're going to watch for this guy. He's done an incredible, incredible job with that team. And obviously, NFL coaches or NFL teams want a little bit of piece of that. So it's going to be interesting to watch what Marcus Freeman does this offseason. I expect him to be at Notre Dame going into 2025, but it is far from set. There are a lot of different teams that want to interview him for head coaching, for defensive coordinator positions, and the right position in the right place, it might just be too hard to pass up. But obviously plenty of time to talk about that. A lot of this will kick up after that Monday game, but definitely something to keep your eye out on. Deion Sanders is another one we're going to have to talk about with NFL jobs, and we'll have to do this a lot, I'll be totally honest with you, and some of it won't be reality. Some of it won't be something that we'll have to worry about, but Deion Sanders has shown interest, quote-unquote, in the Raiders job. It sounds like he is a little bit more interested than some people are expecting. The Las Vegas Review-Journal has said this, but I don't know. I don't see this one happening. I'll be totally honest. There was a video of him doing his first meeting at Colorado for the spring camp this past weekend. I don't expect him to leave Colorado, at least going into 2025. Now, 2026, 27, and so forth, that is a big-time question. There's no doubt about that. But I don't necessarily think this is going to happen. Definitely something that could happen, and if the Raiders do hire him, it's going to be a huge talking point. And Colorado is going to have 1,000,001 questions to answer. But at the end of the day, I do expect him to be the guy going into 2025. I do expect him to be leading Colorado in 2025. But again, that question is still very much up in the air. So Marcus Freeman as well as Deion Sanders are two guys you're going to want to watch pretty closely. I wouldn't expect it to happen, but definitely something that we'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Nick Saban is into the College Football Hall of Fame. This is about as easy of a decision that they have ever had to make around there. And definitely a guy that is college football in a lot of ways and has been for the last 15 years. In fact, we'll probably talk about it a little bit later in the week that the SEC didn't fall. Nick Saban just left. That's the reality of that situation. But overall, there's a lot of different things from this career that you can obviously take in. He's done an incredible job with that program, has built them up into kind of what they are today. Now, Alabama was not bottom feeders before, but there was a moment there before Nick Saban showed up where you were wondering, is Alabama going to be anything close to what they were with Bear Bryant and with a couple of the Gene Stallings and a couple of those other coaches? And then Nick Saban takes over, goes on 7 national championships, just absolutely tears people to pieces. And exactly 1 year after he announces his retirement, he gets the news that he is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's a guy that, frankly, could have been inducted 10 years ago, and I wouldn't have had much of an issue with it. I don't think a lot of people would. So, remarkable coach, definitely a guy that's going to be around college football for a very long time, and I don't think he's going to be college football commissioner as much as some people would like him to be, but at the end of the day, going to be a guy that will live on forever. There's no doubt about that, and especially in the College Football Hall of Fame, but even if he wasn't there, he would live on forever. He absolutely deserves to be there, probably should be the biggest figure there, frankly. Anthony Knapp is someone you're going to want to talk about as we get into this national championship. He will not be playing in the national championship, and this is the guy that had taken over at that left tackle position, started all 15 games for them. A freshman out of Roswell, Georgia, was a 3-star coming in. Charles Jagusa goes down in August, and they have to kind of figure it out. Now, this kid's become an absolute star. He didn't allow a sack in the final 9 games of the season. He's an absolutely incredible player. He is someone that he was a freshman All-American this year. I fully expect him to be a All-American the next couple of years. He's downright incredible and absolutely will be a first-round pick whenever that time does come, but he will not be playing in the national championship. It will likely be Tosh Baker kind of leaning in with him now. Charles Jagusa did come in for Rocco Spindler in that game. Rocco Spindler will be back for the national championship. So maybe it is Charles Jagusa just sliding back into that left tackle position, but it was Tosh Baker for that Penn State game. He allowed 5 hurries and 1 sack on 61 snaps in that game, so did a relatively good job, but not quite the Anthony Knapp level. And you're going to have to deal with Jack Sawyer. You're going to have to deal with JTT. So a lot of different questions here. Now, they do have depth. They have about as good of depth as you can find around the country when it comes to offensive line. But this is a huge hit to their pass pros, a huge hit to Notre Dame in this game. And whether it's Jagusa or whether it's Tosh Baker, they're going to have their hands full with those guys coming up for Ohio State. And this could be the difference. This could very well be the difference in this game on Monday. And then we got some draft declarations from these semifinal teams. Abdul Carter, not a question, obviously was going to jump in, but remarkable player. He could very well go number 1 overall, depending on how teams look at this thing. He is one of the most remarkable players that I've seen in college football in quite some time. The edge rushing is downright incredible, and he's a guy that can make all the plays in the world you possibly need him to make. So I cannot wait to see what this kid does at the next level. Frankly, I think there's a gold jacket in that kid's future. Then you do have Jalen Reed, a remarkable player on the back end for the Nittany Lions. Definitely a guy that kind of sparked their season in a lot of different ways. You know, that Wisconsin pick was a moment that I think a lot of people look at as the turning point for this Penn State team. He was very solid in coverage and definitely is going to be a guy that's going to make a huge amount of plays for them. Now, he moves on to the next level and could very well be a steal. Going to be a very interesting guy to watch and definitely someone that I very much am looking forward to seeing. And let's get to Anthony's questions here. And yeah, it will be interesting to kind of see where Carson Beck finds himself. You know, if it's the end of May, I think they're in a little bit better of shape. If it's closer to the beginning of July, then you might have a little bit of an issue. So it really does come down to just how quickly that heals, how quickly he can get back throwing in. I think it's all up in the air right now. So we'll obviously follow that very closely. Definitely something that's going to be really interesting to watch. And then talking about Heatherman here, a very talented guy. And obviously, that history with Shiano is going to be something that a lot of people are going to talk about, and definitely something that is going to help him in this moment where you're calling plays for a big-time university. Having that background, having that guy to fall back on is downright incredible. But overall, the Kelvin Bank question is an interesting one because he has declared for the draft. Like Carter, he will be a top 10 pick. There's a lot of questions about where he does set up. Now, I do think he can play offensive tackle. Some people have thought about moving him into guard to play for the first couple of years, but overall, I think he's probably a left tackle, depending on the team he gets drafted to in a lot of different ways. Will depend on where he does play, but he can probably play anywhere, if I'm being totally honest, other than center is probably not where you want to put him, but he's very comfortable at left tackle. I think he can play right tackle, but probably is a little bit better on the left, and then you might just move him inside to make sure he plays the first couple of years, but a lot of different things that you can do with Kelvin Banks, such a dynamic player, and definitely a guy that I fully expect to be, if not the first offensive tackle, definitely the second offensive tackle off the board in the class in April. And then Jaden Blue is the other guy, a really, really talented player, the best player on offense really throughout the CFP for Texas. Definitely was a very, very talented guy. Kind of a crowded running back room going into next year, so not overly surprising, if I'm being totally honest. Yeah, I do think, if he gets drafted by a Dolphins-type team, I do think he would be a right tackle. I think he would fit more into that position. It really just comes down to who do you have on the roster, how do you feel confident. If he gets drafted by the Bears, which I've seen in a couple of different ones, he's going to be that left tackle. I can almost promise you that, but a couple of different places definitely would kick him over to the right. A couple of different places would probably kick him into guard. So there's a lot of different questions here, but for Jaden Blue, I think this could be a difference maker at the next level. He's such a good receiving back. I think he's a guy that definitely could jump off the page. Probably won't be drafted until that 4th, 5th, 6th round, but definitely is a guy you're going to want to watch very closely. I think could develop into a huge player for one of these NFL teams in the next couple of years. But remarkable stuff happening all around the country. I mean, there's a million different questions about where guys are going in the portal, what's happening in the national title game, where does Texas and Penn State go from here, a million different things to talk about. We'll get into just about everything around the national title. Tomorrow we'll get into storylines, we'll get into position battles, a million different things, and we'll talk about it all tomorrow. But thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, we have you totally covered over here at GSMC. But thank you once again for listening. We'll be back to talk about everything around the national title in a week from today. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.